Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and it's Tuesday. We're going to be doing a tier list this week. We're going into like the fourth, I think, almost maybe the fifth week of this Mega Rising B1 metagame. However, things are a little bit different, and that's what this tier list is going to be about. Ranked battles are coming back. They actually are coming out in just a couple of days, so I figured, you know what, I'll do a tier list where I'm kind of ranking what I believe are kind of the best decks for ranked battles once the ranked season begins, and then, you know, we'll be covering ranked a little bit more on the channel throughout sort of, you know, the season, because the metagame has changed a lot. I think that anybody that's been following the channel knows that the metagame and all of the best decks are completely different right now than they were, you know, at the beginning of the season when B1 first released, and that's what happens, especially with all of these new cards. We've learned a lot. All of the decks and the strategies have had an opportunity to interact, and, you know, I think that we have the opportunity now to really look at things a little bit more accurately. But yeah, so today's tier list is going to be about ranked battles, which decks are best for the new ranked season. Now, what the difference is, like, that's the big question, right? Like, what's the difference between tournament play and ranked battles? There's a couple of things that I think differentiate the two. Again, if a deck list is good in tournaments, it's probably going to be good for ranked, but you know, the other aspect of ranked battles is pacing, right? So you want to be able to play enough games. You want your deck to be pretty fast paced. You don't want every game to go to, you know, turn 20 or 25 or 30, right? I'm looking at you, Oricorio, right? There's just some inherently slower decks, some more grindy decks that, you know, if they have a really high win rate, it might still be worth playing them, of course, but pacing and overall, you know, I guess speed of your games definitely matters quite a bit. The other thing is like consistency, right? This is maybe less of a factor. Back in the day, like, more consistent decks were always the way to go for ranked because there was not win streak bonuses, at least in Ultra Ball or in Master Ball tier. As far as we know, this new ranked season will still have the win streaks in Ultra Ball and in Master Ball tier. And of course, the win streaks make things definitely a little bit different. But what the win streaks have done is give high roll decks really a place, I suppose, in ranked battles. Now, even if your deck isn't that consistent, you can definitely pop off, win 3, 4, 5 in a row, you know, as long as your deck is inherently strong. So that's kind of what we mean by the high roll decks. They used to not really be good in ranked, but nowadays they're kind of fine. So win streaks have really made the ranked metagame very similar to the tournament metagame in terms of the viability of the deck lists. And the other thing, I guess, to consider is the ease of play, right? This is something that people don't necessarily talk about, but if a deck is simple to play, if it's not really something that requires a ton of, you know, decision-making or differentiation in terms of, you know, how you're playing the game based around your matchups, then, you know, that might be a better deck to choose, right? A deck that's straightforward might be easier to play, you know, 50, 100, 500, 1,000 games, depending on what type of ranked player you are. So there you go. Yeah, those are kind of the key differentiating factors. So we're going to be kind of comparing and contrasting all the decks today for ranked. That was a long intro. We're about 3.5 minutes in. We got to get going because the tier lists typically take a little while. These are all of the decks. We've kind of trimmed a lot of decks off the tier list. I tried to include only the deck lists that are seeing play in the metagame, at least to some degree, which again has changed a lot over the last couple of weeks since we last did a tier list. So let's just kind of jump right into it. No particular order here. We're just going to be going in whatever order, you know, the decks are here on the tier list. First up is going to be Mega Absol and Chingling. So I've sort of split Absol out into, I think, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, like 6 different categories, because Mega Absol itself isn't really the core of the deck, at least most of the time. Mega Absol really is a card that, as long as you're playing dark energies, you can kind of just throw it into your deck and have definitely a really strong closer. And I think that's been the benefit for Mega Absol. That, and also there's a lot of really strong dark type strategies that Mega Absol just kind of pairs well into. Now, Chingling is a different example because, you know, Chingling is a Pokemon that we can theoretically pair in any deck, but I think Mega Absol, it makes a lot of sense, right? We don't want Absol in the active spot early in the game, so Chingling there, it really is kind of the new Oricorio. It's a lot more flexible, although early in the season, people were playing Oricorio Pichu with Absol, but that is not a deck list that it's really seeing play anymore. So this version of Absol will be playing Chingling, but I think oftentimes right now is likely going to be playing either the Leap over Absol or probably like Nihilego Poison Barbs, right? Which is definitely a pretty good strategy. You could also be playing Darkrai, so Darkrai might be sprinkled throughout all of these different Absol archetypes. But this is a version of a deck that's a little bit less reliant on a different package, right? Or a separate package. You know, you're playing Mega Absol, you're playing Chingling, you're playing Poison Barbs, Nihilego. Sure, you can use Nihilego with Poison Barb to get around Oricorio, but I don't suspect there's going to be that much Oricorio, at least in this ranked season. Yeah, I think that Chingling is kind of universally helpful and useful. I think that Chingling is going to be a really good call early in the ranked season, mainly because a lot of people will still be playing Blaziken, and a lot of people are going to be playing Suicune Greninja, and a lot of people will likely be playing Hydreigon. I think people are still infatuated with that high roll potential with the rare candy decks, and Chingling kind of is that one way to counteract those particular strategies. I really like this deck. It's simple, it's consistent. You know, it might struggle against some high roll strategies, of course, if you don't lead Chingling or if they just find that middle evolution on like turn 2, which is possible for a lot of those decks. But I do really like this. And I'm going to go ahead and put strategies like this, particularly this Absol deck, as probably one of the more straightforward versions of Absol. I'm going to put it A tier. I do really like this deck. Again, the games are relatively quick, and I think that, you know, your opponent is likely going to brick into Chingling, and if they don't, then we probably are just going to lose the game. So I like this deck. Consistent, definitely straightforward, and it should be pretty easy to play, you know, a lot of games with for ranked, right? So I like this deck. We're going to put it there into the A tier. Next up is going to be Altaria. Now, we have two different Altaria variants because in the metagame right now, it definitely is kind of split between two. Now, by far the most common way to play Altaria is going to be that package with, double Chingling, Jirachi, either Sableye or Baby Altaria, and then, Indeedee, right? So it's the list that's been seen play in all of the online tournaments. It's by far the most common version of Altaria. And I really like this deck, and I think this is probably the #1 example of a deck that is, I think there's probably 2 or 3 decks that are really like S tier ranked potential. These are decks that are pretty simple, pretty straightforward, very, very consistent, and don't have necessarily like hard counterplay that's popular in the metagame right now. Mega Altaria has been dominating tournaments, and I think it is just the golden child of this metagame. It's like the premier example of a deck list that is consistent and strong, has a lot of options, can do a lot of different things here, and at the end of the day, if you get Altaria out on turn 2, you're probably going to win the game unless your opponent has an answer to it. From a win rate perspective, throughout tournaments for the last 2 or 3 weeks, this has been the highest win rate effectively out of any of the most played decks, so this is going to be sort of the standard version of Altaria, the most popular build out for Mega Altaria, and this to me is an S tier deck list. Again, you got to keep in mind, you're going to be hitting a lot of other meta decks in ranked battles, but you're also probably going to be hitting a lot of like jank decks, like decks that really aren't meta decks, and I think that Altaria really punishes decks like that, right? If something isn't particularly strong or is kind of niche for some particular matchups, or in general is just inconsistent, you're going to win so many games just because you're super consistent and you're playing Chingling, and those are definitely sort of the best recipes for being successful for ranked, I think, at least in this season. Things could be completely different, right? We don't actually know much about the ranked season, but the new mini set is set to release on December 17th, which is again like only like 2.5-3 weeks after the ranked season comes out. So we don't really know what's going to be happening then. I'm really kind of putting this tier list out for that first 2 or 3 weeks of the ranked season, if that makes sense. But Mega Altaria, it's got to go into the S tier. It really, really does. Now, the other version of Altaria that I actually really, really like, however, we have, less data about it. It's a little bit less proven. That's going to be Altaria with Giratina. So this is a bit more of a straightforward version of Altaria, playing double Altaria, playing Giratina, double copies of Giratina, and then double copies of Indeedee. And I think this deck list, again, benefits from a lot of different things. This is something that doesn't nearly see as much play as the other version. It's basically like 20-1 in terms of its meta share, but I really think this version of Altaria is slept on. And I think Giratina is slept on. I just think that this is a deck list that every single card in your deck can be useful. We're playing only Psychic Energies. Every single Pokemon is a valuable attacker. Giratina can generate its own energies. It's good in the active because you can attack on turn 3 for 130. Mega Altaria can come in and attack. Even Indeedee can deal damage in a lot of different scenarios. So the only downside to the Giratina deck, to me, is that both Giratina and Indeedee are weak to Dark, and they will get one-hit KO'd by Hydreigon. And Hydreigon is going to be very popular, I think. It'll probably be the #1 high roll strategy. The trend right now in the metagame is that Hydreigon is kind of taking the place of Blaziken from that sort of rare candy high roll pop-off deck potential. It's kind of overtaking it in the metagame. So that's the only thing to me that's a little bit scary about the Giratina Indeedee deck. because when you're playing Altaria, you likely are going to be playing Rocky Helmet, so you're not playing Giant Capes or anything like that. It's just a little bit scary into the Hydreigon matchup. So that's something that we can expect to see a lot of is Hydreigon. So I'm going to be reserving the Altaria Giratina deck for A tier. Again, less of a sample size for us to really gauge, but also not something that I really love going into I don't love Giratina or Indeedee into Hydreigon. So it's going to go there into the A tier. Still a quality deck. It's still Altaria. Double Indeedee is kind of broken, I'm not going to lie. But anyway, we're going to put it right there into the A tier. Next up, let's talk about Blaziken Heatmor, because this really is kind of the only version right now of Blaziken that we're seeing. But we got to understand what the metagame looks like right now. What is the metagame doing actively right now, right? I think that the meta is shifting away from Oricorio to a pretty significant degree. I think that Absol Oricorio was kind of driving the meta going into that like first and second week. And Blaziken really changed his deck list accordingly, but then everybody else changed their decks according to Blaziken Heatmor. So I think right now, Blaziken's really interesting because depending on how you play it, it operates very, very differently. We are going to be talking about Blaziken Entei later in this tier list as well. But Blaziken Heatmor, to me, not nearly as well positioned as it was. And I think every other deck is also just hitting the bench. Chingling still exists, so I don't really love Blaziken as much as I love the Hydreigon deck. And I think the simplicity of Blaziken does bode well for it, but in general, I just don't think it's as well positioned against a lot of the other decks that you might see play in ranked. Keep in mind, Hydreigon's going to be really common. Suicune Greninja is something that we definitely have to talk about today. And I think Blaziken Heatmor is not a big fan of really any of that. Magnezone or Oricorio also still exists. So every other deck is now kind of being built in the way that Blaziken Heatmor was built. But they kind of do it better to some degree because they don't really have to deal with rare candy. You know what I mean? So it's a bit of an awkward thing. I think Blaziken has room to grow. I'm going to be putting Blaziken Heatmor in the B tier. Again, not the most consistent deck in the world, being a rare candy deck list. Chingling still exists, and I think all of the other decks are now playing bench damage anyway, so it's not that great, and I think that Suicune Greninja definitely on the rise is kind of the number 2, number 3 deck in terms of play rate. Maybe in ranked it might be the most play deck, we'll have to see, but anyway, Blaziken Heatmor, I'm going to put it right there into the B tier. I don't think it's horrible, I don't think it's great. Next up, though, is going to be Crobat Absol. Again, a lot of Absol variants in this deck, and I think in this tier list, I think they're all very good. I think Crobat has a ton of potential. I think it's very, very slept on. This is both a consistent deck, but also a high roll deck in the sense that it is a rare candy sort of matchup here, but we are playing Nihilego to get around Oricorio. Crobat EX is not a bad Pokemon, especially the scenarios where we do get that turn 2 rare candy Crobat off. Again, we're able to attack with it whether we go first or second. It's very similar to Hydreigon in that sense. It operates almost exactly like Hydreigon operates in the Hydreigon Absol decks, but we have a little bit more HP. We deal a little bit less damage over, from a pop-off perspective, but it's still a low energy attack cost. You only have to commit 1 energy to Absol. I really like this strategy. In fact, I think it's massively underrated, and I think it deserves to see a little bit more play. Now, again, I think it's the direct in between. So we said this on Meta Monday. There's like 2 premier sort of Absol variants, I think, that are seeing play. That's going to be with Naganadel, and then it's going to be with Hydreigon. And Crobat, to me, is like the weird, awkward cousin that is right in between the two, but to me is just as good as either of them, even though it hasn't seen as much play. We're going to be putting it A tier. I think that Crobat is really good. And I think, again, we're playing Crobat EX, we're playing Nihilego, we're playing Mega Absol. It's a very, very good deck in my mind. One of my favorites currently in the metagame right now. Likely going to have a pretty good win rate. And the Zubat with Nihilegos can deal a lot of damage as well, right? So whether we're leading Nihilego or we're leading Zubat, both are totally fine. We can play X speed in the deck. Definitely one of my favorite lists currently in the metagame right now. I'm going to be putting it A tier. Next up, what do we have? We have the Espeon Indeedee deck, which is also very interesting. A very, very, very interesting deck list. Again, not something that likely would love to go against Hydreigon. So, there's a couple of decks in here that are, their matchup volatility into Hydreigon does scare me a little bit, but I really love this deck from its consistency standpoint. And again, it's very difficult to deal with. I think that this is Espeon, version 2. This is the upgraded version of Espeon. We don't necessarily have to play Sylveon because realistically, we have Copycat now. We don't need all of that draw. Having a bunch of cards in our hand is likely a liability anyway because other decks are playing Copycat, and Indeedee plus Espeon is just an incredible amount of healing. And against a lot of matchups, you're going to be able to effectively just win the game through that healing alone, right? Now, again, we're weak to Dark, and that's the downside here is that Hydreigon is just going to sweep through our team. We can't play Giant Capes, but it's not something that I'm very confident in that matchup specifically. So to me, I don't know exactly. This is a deck that, again, is not seeing that much play. realistically, if we go, I'm just curious. So if I go to the overall sort of metagame data, it is creeping up to be the 19th most played deck so far this season, which is pretty impressive considering it is a new deck list, but it's floating around a 50% win rate. Again, not a bad deck list whatsoever, but I'm not super confident in it. Hydreigon, very popular. I'm going to be putting this also B tier. Now, before we continue, I do just also want to mention that if any deck lists aren't in this tier list, it's not that they're not good options. It's just that they're not necessarily popular, or we don't have enough data on them recently for me to gauge their viability in a ranked meta. But you got to keep in mind, okay, there's one thing you got to understand. Reaching Master Ball tier in ranked is very easy, okay? Like, it just depends on whether or not you're playing enough games. You could literally hit 1450, which is Master Ball, playing probably any deck that you could think of if you play enough games. So we're kind of judging these decks based around how easy it would be to climb to the #1 spot theoretically, or to top 1000, right? So just keep that in mind. Any deck on this tier list here is going to get you to 1450 if you play enough games. That is 100% the case. You only need like a 42% win rate. So anyway, next up is going to be Goodra. This was kind of a flavor of the week deck, but it is still something that exists in the metagame. It's definitely niche. It's not a deck list that I love, but it's really not horrible. We need definitely some C tier and some D tier mentions in this video, so that's going to be sort of the difficult part here. I don't hate the deck list. It's operating at around a 47% win rate in tournament play, which again, if you equate people like dropping from tournaments and whatnot, it's likely just a little bit below 50%, which when you compare it to all of the other decks of the metagame, it's not great. This to me is definitely going to be like a C to D tier deck. Again, most of the bad tier decks we just didn't include on the tier list, because if something's bad at this point in the metagame, it just doesn't really see play. And that's kind of the reality of it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put Goodra probably, do we just put a D tier, I guess? I mean, there's not really that many other bad decks here on the tier list. We'll put it, man, this is tough. I guess we'll put it C tier. We'll put it C tier. Maybe it goes D tier. I don't know. I don't have much else to say about it. It's definitely sort of a niche combo, but if it does get set up, if you draw the right cards, you're totally fine. The main issue with Goodra, of course, is that it's a multi-energy attack cost. So some games you literally can't play the game. And that inherently is always the downside to Dragon-type Pokemon. You have to basically take any Dragon-type deck and then just knock off like a 5% win rate, just because sometimes you automatically lose the game just by RNG and Energy Zone alone. That's the reality of Dragon-type decks. For ranked, they're never very consistent or very good. Next up is Jolteon, and Jolteon is still seeing a little bit of play, but again, for me, this is not something that is like real meta contending. You know what I mean? It is still seeing play. It's the 17th most played deck so far this entire season, which doesn't seem like that high, but realistically, like it's above a lot of other common meta decks. So we're going to be putting Jolteon probably also C tier. I think that this is very similar to Goodra. It's more consistent, but its overall ability to do things is very much not that high. You know what I mean? Like the damage it can deal with Jolteon is specifically really good. It can be good into Hydreigon, you know, hitting for that 60 damage whenever they like roar in unison. It's cool. It's definitely not bad. There are some popular water decks in the format, but this deck just doesn't have enough going for it for me to really feel super comfortable about it. And whenever you're mixing like low HP 2-prize Pokemon into your deck list, like it's kind of a little bit sketchy. You know what I mean? Jolteon is also a stage 1 Pokemon, so it lacks a little bit of consistency. It's definitely interesting. It's probably a deck list that could be really good in Suicune Greninja specifically, but against most of the other things, I'm not very confident in it. We're going to put it C tier. Next up is going to be Naganadel. So Naganadel and Mega Absol. This is something that's been popping off as of recent. One of my favorite decks, actually like at the moment, went to the grand finals this weekend. And I think that this is definitely not a bad deck list, but in the same vein, it's like, are we really going to consider this, you know, a top tier deck list? Like, I think the discrepancy between A tier and B tier is pretty significant. And I want to reserve A tier for like the decks that I truly do recommend. And I think Naganadel is good. Definitely not bad, but is it better than just playing Hydreigon? Like inherently, it's going to have some strengths, but I still think it's a deck list that relies on drawing the proper cards at the proper times. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, it's definitely has a lot to it that can go wrong. You know what I mean? It's not nearly as consistent as you maybe want it to be, but it is effectively the replacement for Guzzlord, which is on the tier list, by the way. But most people are just playing Absol in place of Guzzlord and no Celesteela, and I think that's totally fine. But I think a big upside to Naganadel, quite honestly, is the fact that you can just deal with Oricorio and baby Pokemon like super easily, which is really, really nice. It's specifically going to be nice into like Mega Altaria because a lot of these Pokemon have 50 HP or lower. And that means Naganadel on turn 1 can just kind of take a free KO really early. It can KO a Swablu, can KO a Jirachi or a Chingling or whatever. And that's definitely really, really nice. But when I take a look at this deck into a lot of the other decks in the meta, I just don't know if Naganadel is really that useful. And you're kind of just giving your opponent the ability to take a KO on turn 2, especially if they do get like Hydreigon up and running or Blaziken or anything for that matter on turn 2. I don't mind it. I really don't. It's definitely floating like high B tier, low A tier in my mind. It did get grand finals this past weekend, but its win rate throughout the tournament wasn't like super phenomenal either. Like it wasn't the most like highest win rate deck. It was about a 50% win rate. I'm gonna put it. I'll put it like top of B tier. I don't think it's bad, but I don't know if I would really. Again, in ranked mode, am I really going to be playing Naganadel over some of the other versions of Absol? You know what I mean? It's like the upside just to me is like not as high, and it's not as consistent, right? You know what I mean? So like that's how I feel about Naganadel. Definitely not a bad deck list whatsoever. It's very bordering here, but I am just going to put it like high B tier for now. Next up is going to be Quad Absol, and the main difference here with Quad Absol is that we're not necessarily playing Chingling in a lot of the decks, right? You can play like one Chingling, but a lot of decks are kind of just playing, like the core of the deck is double Absol, double Mega Absol, and then double Nihilego with Poison Barb. So really depending on whatever Pokemon we lead off with, we can kind of do something. Going second, I like this deck list a lot. Leap over Absol is strong. So this is effectively just like playing Mega Absol, how we're playing Heatmor Blaziken, except, you know, we don't need the rare candy stage 2 Pokemon. We just have like, normal Absol on our bench. It's just a basic Pokemon. So it's very consistent. It's very consistent, low Pokemon count. You can play extra supporter cards in the deck list. I really like it. Its win rate is really high, even though the amount of people playing the deck list is pretty low in comparison to other Absol variants. Its win rate is always phenomenally high. And I think that we have to kind of probably give Absol some representation into the S tier. I know some people might have seen our short that I posted the other day. It was basically just a meme. There's all these people. I love the comments I get of people who are like, you need to admit you're wrong about Mega Absol or whatnot. And you know, even though I've done it a million times, the card is way better than I thought it would be. But again, I don't think it's like the strongest card in the game. But anyway, what am I talking about? Yeah, Mega Absol and Absol. Quad Absol is what we call this list. I think it's good. I do. And I think we need some type of Absol representation in S tier, I believe. So to me, it's like kind of tough. Like if I didn't put Absol Chingling up here, because I guess the main difference between these two deck lists, Quad Absol and Absol Chingling, is that one of these is playing, you know, the baby Absol with Leap Over, and one of them's just not. And I do think that the Leap Over Absol probably does make this deck really good, especially in ranked when you take a look at a lot of the other decks that are likely going to see play. I'm going to put this S tier. I just am. Again, it's very similar, low Pokemon count, very consistent. You can just play like one Chingling in the list, and I think it's totally fine as well. So, I have to recommend this. I do. I mean, I think that it's consistent. It can beat a lot of different matchups, and I think that it kind of fits all of the criteria that I want in a ranked deck list, something I can play a lot of games with. I can just spam it. It's pretty straightforward. There's a little bit of luck involved, but for the most part, our board state's kind of getting set up in the way that we want most of the time. Definitely one of my favorite decks. And again, I think if I'm deciding a deck for ranked, I'm really thinking about these really consistent options. And I think that Quad Absol really kind of fits that bill for me. So I'm going to be putting Quad Absol as sort of my S tier representation for Absol. Again, this isn't tournaments, this is ranked, right? So consistency and pacing to me really does matter a little bit more, even though, of course, in tournaments, like this is a deck that might get absolutely rolled by a Hydreigon in like top 8, but like, you know, in ranked, it doesn't matter, right? All we need to do is just win like 50 to 55% of our games, and I think all of these decks in S tier are going to do that for basically anybody that plays these decks. So anyway, I'll put that one in the S tier. Next up is going to be Greninja Absol. This to me was definitely like a flash in the pan last week. This is a deck list that's cool. You know, it's very cool, but again, if we're playing rare candies and we're playing like a bench Pokemon like Greninja, it's taking up a lot of space in our deck. It is strong. We all love Water Shuriken Cyrus. It fits very, very well. But at the end of the day, is this something that, you know, you really should be playing? And I think that the win rates for Greninja Absol really have been quite low, if we're being honest with you. It's just not a consistent deck. And I think that, you know, I think it just suffers from a lot of different factors. Definitely really cool. Like, again, it's a deck list that I really, really like. but not something that I feel necessarily that confident in. And I think that Absol needs something to provide a lot of pressure in the early game, right? Imagine going first with this deck list and you're leading Mega Absol and you just don't find Rare Candy Greninja, or the Chingling lock is on and you just kind of don't do anything. It's just not a good deck list. And you know what I mean in that sense. So from a consistency standpoint, I don't love it. I think the Greninja stuff probably should be reserved for Suicune and its draw power. We're going to be putting Greninja Absol C tier. This is really not a good deck from a consistency standpoint and from a win rate perspective recently. So, you know, we have to be realistic with this deck, and we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to put it C tier because honestly, that's kind of where I think it belongs. I'm not going to lie. I think it's really not that good. If you're going to be playing a Rare Candy deck with Absol, like just play Hydreigon. You know what I'm saying? Next up is Magnezone, right? So, you know, we said this earlier, right? Oricorio decks really aren't that popular typically in ranked just because, you know, they're slow decks. If something is really popular in the metagame that gets sort of hard-walled by Oricorio, then it has a place. Magnezone Oricorio, to me, it functions a little bit differently than sort of Oricorio typically would in the metagame. It's not something that is there to specifically counter any deck in the metagame, because every single deck that is played currently in the meta is kind of built to just be able to deal with Oricorio in a very funny way, because Oricorio isn't very common. In fact, really the only popular meta deck playing Oricorio at this point is going to be Magnezone Oricorio. But again, it operates differently. It's just sort of a slow roll strategy. And Oricorio, you know, Magnezone, they pair really, really well. It's way more consistent now with copycats and May and stuff. This is a good deck, and I think that it's, you know, it's a mid to late game deck. So, you know, we have to keep that in mind. But it's very consistent. It's very consistent, and it definitely has a pretty good matchup spread across the board. What really stands out to me about Magnezone Oricorio is that it's going to be very, very good. Its win rate into Suicune Greninja is quite high, and that's a big deal, right? Because there's going to be a lot of people are playing Suicune in ranked. Trust me, a lot of people will be playing Suicune in ranked. So Magnezone, to me, deserves A tier. It really does. It's not the fastest deck in the world, but it's consistent. You're playing Oricorio. Like, I really like Magnezone. In fact, there's a case to be made realistically to put this in the S tier, but we're going to keep it A tier for now. I'll give it like a top A tier mention. I'll just slide it in like right here. A really good option. I mean, it's consistently had a great win rate. It's always placing pretty well in tournaments. I think for ranked, it's a deck list that, again, is very straightforward. You can play this deck and you can just go ahead and probably win a decent amount of your games and probably climb. Maybe a little bit slowly, but definitely consistently, which I like. Next up is Ampharos. Ampharos. It's still on the tier list because I think Ampharos deserves to be on the tier list, unlike Gyarados. But yeah, the issue with Ampharos is that it's just not very good, and I think it suffers from the same problems that really any Pokemon does right now with a 3 or higher energy attack cost, which is that you're not always able to attack on your second turn, and that is inherently a really, really bad thing, especially in the metagame right now. And Ampharos has the ability. Sorry, my phone dinged on me. Ampharos has the ability to kind of come back from behind and win games by taking multiple KOs in one attack, but that strategy is not nearly as consistent as maybe you would want it to be. I think that Ampharos does well in scenarios where, you know, of course, your opponent maybe doesn't play any healing, or they play some low HP Pokemon on their bench, like a baby Pokemon or like a 50 HP basic, and that way Ampharos theoretically with Cyrus can 2-hit KO the you know, another, you know, 2-prize or 3-prize Pokemon sometimes, at least, while also taking a KO on the bench, right? And that's really relevant, but at the same vein, I think Ampharos just lacks consistency. Not only is it a rare candy Pokemon, it's a stage 2 Pokemon, but it has a 3 energy attack cost. And that's just, no matter how strong the attack is, the metagame right now is just filled with Pokemon that don't necessarily have to deal with that. Even though I know we just talked about Magnezone, Magnezone operates very, very differently. Oricorio can just sit in the active, and Magnezone can power itself up with Magneton's ability. So it's very unique in that sense. Magnezone is the exception. Imagine playing Oricorio Magnezone, but effectively you have to commit energies to the Magnezone manually. And that means you can't really commit them to Oricorio. It just doesn't feel that good. You can play Electrical Cord, Tool Card, but that's, of course, not that consistent. I'm going to be putting Ampharos D tier, which to me is sad. But again, for ranked, it's not something like, yeah, specifically, we might be able to do really well, you know, against Suicune and Greninjas, sure. But other than that, you're going to be really struggling from a consistency standpoint. I love Ampharos. I thought it was a really strong anti-meta choice, but I think there's other decks that really kind of fit the anti-meta bill at this point, you know, in the metagame. So Ampharos is going D tier. Sad to say. In fact, it probably shouldn't even be on the tier list, but we did include it anyway. So there we go. Next up is Suicune and Greninja. We do have 2 versions of Suicune and Greninja still. And, you know, to be fair, I think that both of these decks are good, but I'm going to be going from like a win rate perspective here because, again, consistency is king and ranked. And I think that Suicune Greninja is very, very good. It's got to be at least one of these versions of Suicune has to go in the S tier. So the first one we're going to talk about is the more traditional version, which is 2 copies of Water Shuriken Greninja. Most of the time they're playing Giratina. Some people really, really like it. Some people don't like Giratina. It really is kind of a mixed bag. But what I'm going to be looking at is the overall win percentage for these decks throughout the last week or two. And when I take a look at that data, one thing that stands out to me is that, you know, the new version with Greninja EX, 2 copies of Greninja EX instead of 1, theoretically has a much higher win rate than the traditional. But anyway, I guess if we're going to rank traditional Suicune Greninja, which likely might still be the more popular option, I still think it's very, very good. I'm going to be putting it S tier. I'm going to be putting it right at the top of S tier, or I guess like right in the middle of S tier. Definitely not a bad deck whatsoever, but I think that from a consistency standpoint, and from an ability to just sort of always kind of be where we want to be and always have enough options here, especially in this meta right now with Absol, right? That's the thing that we have to understand, is that Absol decks are the meta right now. You're going to be facing a Mega Absol in a virtually like probably 30 to 40% of your decks, at least in tournaments right now. And that to me is definitely skewing the metagame away from this traditional version of Suicune Greninja a little bit more. And the main reason for that is our ability to live multiple hits from Ampharos. And I think that, or not Ampharos, sorry, Absol. And I think that Greninja EX does that a little bit better. So I think that for this version of Suicune and Greninja, like I'm going to greatly prefer it. I think going into this metagame, I think that more often, more consistently, you're able to live an attack, go into Greninja EX, you know, take an attack to the face and then Irida, and then take another attack. And I think that's really valuable, right? Hydreigon's going to see play. Mega Absol's going to be everywhere. You know, Mega Altaria with Rocky Helmets are floating around. So, you know, Suicune has 140, double Giant Capes in the deck. That's 160, but, you know, Guzma sees a little bit of play. Other people are playing Rocky Helmet, which kind of negates, to be fair, the Giant Capes, or they're playing, you know, Nihilego and Poison Barbs, right? So which that's going to also negate the Giant Cape. So the HP value is a bit more important now, and I think that Greninja EX kind of fills that niche pretty well. I do think that Suicune Greninja deserves at least an S tier spot going into ranked, because I think it likely will be the most played deck in ranked, if not Altaria will be, but it's going to be a phenomenal option, so I have to put it S tier to me. I'm actually going to put it above, yeah, we're going to put it like right here, right? So these are the 3 decks that I would play. I would play the most consistent version of Absol, which to me right now is Quad Absol, whether you want to play Chingling or not. But Quad Absol, very consistent, very, very strong. And I think you're either playing Suicune Greninja or you're playing Altaria. And like these to me are the most consistent, powerful decks right now for ranked. These would be my number 3 options. Very, very good. Definitely really, really, really strong decks that I would highly recommend to anybody. They're all honestly pretty simple to play as well, I would say, at least. Well, Suicune's a little bit different, right? Suicune, you gotta, you know, I think when you're playing against Suicune, it's a little bit more difficult than when you're playing Suicune. But in the mirror matchup, it's definitely a more complex mirror matchup, so you have to definitely account for that. You know what I mean? But anyway, yeah, that's where I'm putting the 2 Suicune decks. I think they're both good, you know, depending on what variant you play. As long as you're playing Suicune Greninja to any degree, you're going to be fine. And you're definitely going to be able to climb pretty well. So there we go. Next up is Entei Blaziken. Now, this is a deck list that people don't really play anymore, and probably for good reason. You know, I think that this is a deck list that's just a little bit too slow. We can benefit from Entei, but again, you got to look at the meta right now. You take a look at the meta, you're seeing some Oricorio in there, you're seeing a lot of Chingling, you know, we're seeing, you know, bench damage, so people are able to basically attack over Entei to get to your bench Torchic or your Blaziken. There's just a lot in the way here. The draw power from Entei is very, very good, of course. However, you know, copycat exists, and everybody's going to be drawing a bunch of cards because your hand is so big. And that to me is more of a liability than anything. The win rate for this deck has plummeted pretty dramatically, and I think that Blaziken is going to suffer from a lot of the same issues. And again, I think that Heatmor Blaziken is totally fine right now, but Entei Blaziken is definitely something I would probably avoid. I'm going to be putting it C tier to me. Definitely not a top option currently in the meta, and that's my opinion. Next up is going to be Decidueye. Let's talk about Decidueye because, again, it fell off a little bit, but Decidueye uniquely is a deck list that I think is, it should be very well positioned moving forward, at least in my understanding of it. It's of course not the most consistent deck in the world, but it's been buffed from a consistency standpoint, of course, as every other deck has with copycats in May and stuff. But take a look at the decks here high up in the metagame, right? Absol, this is a deck that does not love Decidueye. Suicune Greninja is theoretically a deck that has, you know, in the past been been walled by Decidueye. It has been hard countered by Decidueye. So I think multiple of the top deck options in the game right now really do not love Decidueye, and I think that Mega Blaziken is going to see a massive decline in play. And I'm not speaking this into existence. I'm just predicting it. I think Blaziken will really drop down in play. I think a lot of people are going to be playing Hydreigon. They're going to be playing Absol. They're going to be playing Altaria. They're going to be playing Suicune. Like, that's the meta. And I think Decidueye is very uniquely well positioned into those matchups specifically, which is why I really like Decidueye. I'm not going to lie. I really do like it. I'm going to be putting it A tier. I'm going to be putting it like mid A tier. It's got to be good. It has to be. Everything that I know about the matchup spreads in the matchup data in the meta right now kind of points to Decidueye being a really strong choice. And I love it. It's really operating very uniquely in the metagame right now as sort of this like checks and balances deck where it's like, hey, you're getting a little bit too big for your britches over there, Suicune. You know, oh, okay, Absol's coming in. You know, we got an Absol deck in here. Listen, I'm Decidueye. You know what I mean? I'm not playing a bunch of bench Pokemon, and I'm hitting the bench, and I'm hitting, you know, dark type Pokemon for weakness. I got a lot of HP. I'm basically hard countering several of the top meta decks in the game right now. Decidueye has to be at least an A tier mention. That's where it's going to go. That's where I think it has to go, quite frankly. Next up is going to be Hitmonchan. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, why did I put Hitmonchan on the tier list this week? I don't actually know. I guess I forgot to remove it, but I don't have much else to say about this. Again, it's just a deck that isn't very good. What else can I say about it? I think, honestly, at this point, people are probably playing Hitmonchan with Lucario and not so much Rampardos. Rampardos is not a bad Pokemon, but again, I think that, you know, Hydreigon has really kind of taken, it's not, we haven't even done it. Hydreigon has really taken the glory away from Rampardos. It really is like Rampardos 2.0. I like Hitmonchan, and I think that it's actually probably fine. You know, the cool thing about Hitmonchan is like if you go second, you can just start KOing a lot of Pokemon in the active, right? Which is unique. But you still can't KO Oricorio, and that to me is really bad. I think that if Hitmonchan had the ability to hit through Oricorio, it would probably be a bit better, even though Oricorio doesn't see that much play. Anyway, we're putting it D tier. Sorry, I talked a little bit too much about it, but yeah, it's just not a good deck. I probably shouldn't have even put it on the tier list. I'm not gonna lie. But come on. We needed a fighting deck on the tier list, right? It's really not even like a part of the meta. It's not even a meta deck at this point, but whatever. Next up, let's talk about Hydreigon. Yeah, and listen, I know Hydreigon just won the Pocket Meds tournament. Listen, people are going to clown me because, like, they love Hydreigon. But we have to understand what this deck is. This is like traditional high roll. If you watch the tournament broadcast, you know, the player who won the tournament was just going turn 2 rare candies game after game after game. And, like, that's how you win tournaments, right? Is that you play a really strong Pokemon that has that potential and you get a little bit lucky, right? That's what it's all about. Tournament play is very different from ranked, right? You can play Hydreigon and brick 7 games in a row, and it's just not going to be a deck that you maybe love playing. But again, win streaks do exist. So, you know, if we didn't have win streaks in Master Ball, I would not be ranking Hydreigon very high just because it's not that consistent. But we do have win streaks. So for every, you know, 7 losing streaks that we go on from bricking, like, we might pop off with Hydreigon, just like our man did in the tournament, and go on big win streak. So, you know, I don't really hate the deck list. Its average win rate isn't the highest, but it's really not terrible either. It's not bad. Like, I think, again, as far as high roll goes, it's probably up there. Throughout the season, it's been operating at about a 51% win rate, which is, you know, not the highest, but for a high roll deck, that's pretty high. I'm not going to lie. We're going to be putting it we're going to probably put it like low A tier. Oh, we'll put it just A tier, I think. I'll put it like right here next to Suicune and Greninja. You know what I mean? Because, like, and again, it's not a bad deck, right? So it wouldn't be my #1 recommendation if you're trying to grind ranked, but like all of these decks in A tier are very good. I think we have a pretty stacked A tier currently in the metagame. And people, I don't want people to get disrespected because, like, we have A tier and we have S tier, and we need to differentiate the two. And I like to keep S tier a little bit more exclusive, and that's why I think the A tier is just filled with very good decks. So don't like feel bad if like your favorite deck's in A tier. That's still a very high tier amongst the top 10, top 5 even decks in the entire game, right? So it's definitely pretty good. Next up is going to be Greninja Oricorio. You might be surprised to see this deck list. It's still seeing play. That's the 11th most played deck so far this season. It's good. This is not a bad deck list. I don't know what else to really tell people other than that this deck will always exist, and it's very annoying to deal with. It's kind of It's just a good deck. Like, I don't know what else to tell people. Like, it's difficult. Like, once you play this deck, you realize you're like, okay, I can't really get around Oricorio, and oh, they got Greninja up turn 2 because the copycat exists and the deck's consistent now, and they're like, well, okay. So now they're, they're pinging damage me. They're kind of hitting the bench. They're kind of, Cyrusing up whatever they want to. They're putting pressure on me with Oricorio. Like, it really ends up being a deck list that's hard to beat. You know what I mean? Again, not the fastest deck in the world, which is, definitely going to play into a factor for it a little bit. But, we have to be realistic. We have to be realistic here. Win streaks matter. Consistency matters. This is not a bad deck. Very, very underrated. Some people might be surprised to see this, but I will be putting this deck in A tier. I'll put it like bottom A tier because I'm not like, I don't like believe in it super heavily, but this is like the other way to play Oricorio right now. It's with Greninja. It's been around for quite some time, really since the beginning of time, to be fair. This has always been a strong deck. And, one of the other like original like control decks in the game, you know what I mean? Now we have Absol, we have Chingling, like I get it, but like back in the day, like this was how you kind of played like a slow grindy control match. And this deck still does that pretty well. I'll be 100% honest with you. Only single prize Pokemon as well, which is kind of broken. And I think at this point, this deck plays Suicune anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure this is just a Suicune deck at this point. So, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're at that point. Anyway. Yeah, I'm going to put it A tier. I am. That's all I have to say about it. Next up's Pinsir. I believe heavily in Pinsir. However, I think the only way people really are playing Pinsir is going to be with Leafeon, like still. In fact, do people even play this deck? I don't know. It's probably something that I probably should not have put it on the tier list. I think Pinsir suffers from really the same exact thing, which is that it's got 3 energies in its attack cost, and its retreat cost is 2, which is not good, especially if we lead Pinsir, the game is effectively over. So, I think Pinsir has potential. In fact, I was sort of testing a version with Pinsir, like with Chingling and the new Lilligant, which buffs HP. It's pretty fun. I think Pinsir has way more potential than people give it credit for. It's just, it's never going to be at the same sort of consistency level. Also coin flips, right? So like LOL. We're going to put it D tier. It's again, this is reserved for like the decks that just like really aren't like meta. You know what I mean? They're just not, they're not really meta decks. In fact, we probably should put more decks into the B tier now that I'm realizing it. Let's move Greninja or Oricorio B tier, I think actually. Nah, we got to keep it A tier. The A tier is big. We got a big A tier this week. I mean, that's how I feel about it. You know what I mean? That's just my opinions here. Next up will be Guzzlord, Naganadel. Again, a deck list that's been sort of overtaken, unfortunately, by Naganadel Absol. And like, what happens in the metagame is that, when decks that have a very, very similar sort of comparison that just don't see much play, like it's really tough to rank them. So like this is a deck that probably will be just gone from the meta because everyone's going to be playing Absol. But for right now, I think they're fairly comparable. I would prefer you play Absol, but I think Guzzlord's definitely totally fine. Also, Grindcore, LOL, right? We can just discard energies, win games. It's probably not something I would recommend. Maybe we even just put this like C tier. We'll put it C tier. How about that? I don't know where. We'll put it like middle C tier. How about that? There we go. B tier only has 3 decks in it. I'm now realizing, but we've kind of just elected to put a lot of the B tier decks in A tier this week, and I think that's probably fine. And that's the tier list here, guys. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Comment down below. I feel actually pretty good about this, and I'm actually really excited for ranked. I think a lot of people are pretty interested in it. But keep in mind, we will still be running the Pokémon tournament series even throughout, the next month or two when ranked exists, as long as we have the team of judges, moderators, and casters that can help run the tournament and people keep participating. We'll keep running the tournaments. We don't have a sponsor, so the prize pools are kind of sponsored by the community members. So big shout out to Shelby is their name, who committed or donated the Full Art Professor's research to the prize pool this week, and then of course $100, which is basically funded by the channel members. So shout out to the channel members. We're going to keep the tournaments going. In fact, I assume a lot of people might actually play this weekend, even with ranked being released, but we'll have to see. It'll still be there. The ranked tournament, the tournaments really define the metagame. Ranked kind of is its own thing, especially with sort of the, the overseas, like Asian player influence. Like that's where a lot of the cool creative decks kind of also see play in. So they influence each other, but I would say for the most part, tournament meta definitely sort of solidifies the metagame. So it'll continue to go on. But there's the tier list, guys. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Again, if anything was not in this video, if I didn't talk about a particular deck, it's just because it's really not popular in the metagame. So it's just, I don't have like a lot of data to really back it up. But to be honest, getting to Master Ball is very easy. Just play enough games. Any deck on this tier list, literally any deck in the game will probably work for you. I'm not going to lie. But it'll be pretty contentious. Like in the first few days, like if you're hopping on ranked in like day 1 or day 2. Like there's going to be a lot of players that are pretty strong looking to get a head start on the ranked climb. And I certainly am not one of them, but I will be playing ranked. And we will be live streaming it either Wednesday or Thursday night. I guess Thursday's Thanksgiving, but we'll go live with more ranked battles here in the future on the channel. And yeah, guys, this is what I'm feeling. To be honest with you, I'm probably going to be playing, you know, either like a consistent Absol deck, or I'll be playing Altaria. Those are kind of my options right now. I'm not a big fan of Suicune, but also Chingling is interesting to me. We'll have to see what the landscape kind of feels like when we play ranked, but this is going to be sort of my early ranked battles, ranked season tier list. So comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Shout out to our sponsor for today's video. And yeah, I have nothing else to say. It was a 45-minute tier list. That's fine, I think. It's not about, you know what I mean? Like that, I don't know. People like the longer videos, and that's fine. I don't mind making them, you know what I mean? So anyway, there it is. There's the tier list. Ranked battles. Let's go. I'm excited for it. We'll talk about like the best decks for ranked. Like after the ranked season comes out, like this Friday, we'll have a couple of days for ranked play, and I'll get a feel for it myself. I'll make a separate video about it for sure. But for now, you know, this is where we're at, realistically, in my mind, before we get into the season. So let's wrap up the video here. I'm just rambling at this point. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, peace out. Have a good one. Bye.